When the trailer for Volume 9 first dropped, many fans such as myself were ecstatic and intrigued over what the story of this volume would be like, since it was more fantastical than anything we've seen in the series prior. Yet even though all we had was a trailer, some folks were already proclaiming that this volume would be filler since it wasn't taking place on Remnant. And when it ended, many of those same folks insisted that the volume was nothing but a waste of time. Complaints ranged from nothing of substance happened this volume to RWBY didn't grow as a character, but those comments couldn't be farther from the truth. Volume 9 serves as the payoff to several things that have been set up since the beginning of the series, along with exploring the characters' emotional state due to their failures in Volume 8. Had the cast gone straight to Vacuo like some folks wanted, the execution of these things couldn't have been done to the same degree as they were in the Ever After due to the magical nature of the world and the scenarios that the characters were put into. After years of waiting, Bumblebee's ship was rejoiced as their ship finally became canon in Volume 9. While I may have stated in the past that the build-up of this pairing could have been better, I have grown to enjoy the ship, and seeing the two finally confess their feelings to each other did put a smile on my face. Volume 7 took the time to showcase how Yang and Blake are clearly crushing on each other given all their flirting and how they made the other constantly blush. But despite the two spending a lot of time together in Atlas, neither of them took the first step to start the relationship. They both knew how the other felt, but were seemingly waiting for the other to confess first. But things began to change when Yang fell into the void. From Blake's point of view, she just saw the love of her life die, with her no doubt regretting that she never got the chance to confess her feelings to Yang. And Yang probably felt the same when she woke up in the Ever After, since she didn't get the chance to confess her feelings to Blake. This is where the Ever After begins to be important for Bumblebee's development. With how both thought they'd never see each other again, the fact that they got to reunite brings the two of them closer together. Sure, they may have been stranded in another world, but they didn't let that weigh them down since they embraced the joy of being together again. But despite this, the two were still hesitant to act upon their feelings. Cue the Ever After itself deciding to push them into literally taking the next step by having them stranded on a suspended warp bridge where they can only progress by being honest about their feelings for each other. And when the two finally confess and kiss each other, it's framed in the most magical way possible, which would have only been possible in the Ever After. RWBY waiting as long as they did to make Bumblebee canon was the right call, cause I don't think any confession we could have gotten prior would have been as amazing as the one we got in Volume 9. The Ever After was just the perfect location for this long-awaited moment, since with Yang and Blake thinking that they lost each other forever, it makes the confession all the more satisfying. John was one of many characters who suffered from the fall of Beacon, with him losing Pyrrha. While he wore a brave face on the surface, we would be given glimpses that showcase how he carried a lot of guilt over not being able to save Pyrrha, with him believing that he failed as both a friend and a leader. He carried so much guilt with him that he came to believe that his own life didn't matter.
You're just a failure with a death wish.
If I die buying them time, then it's worth it.
But between having a conversation with Pyrrha's mother over how Pyrrha wouldn't regret her choice, along with being comforted by Ren and Nova, he began to not only heal, but grew. While he still had his endearing dorkiness during his time in Atlas, he also became more confident in himself, along with believing that things would work out no matter how bleak they seemed to be. But when he was forced to take Penny's life, it sent him spiraling into his former sorrow. Once again, he failed to be the hero he always aspired to be, since he lost yet another friend. And this sense of failure only became worse when he encountered Alex and Lewis and failed to protect them.
Was it my fault? Did I change the story? I couldn't even be the make-believe hero.
With him facing one failure after another, he became obsessed with protecting the people pleasers and stopping them from ascending despite their desire to do so, since he enjoyed the thrill of being able to actually save someone. Now sure, you could argue that if John had made it to Vacuo, he would still be wrestling with the guilt of having to end Penny's life, which could then manifest in him being overprotective. But it wouldn't have been as effective as it was in the Ever After, since John had to deal with this grief alone for years with no proper support system. So it only makes it all the more uplifting how after years of believing that he was a failure, he comes to accept that said failures don't make him any less of a hero or a good person. Now compared to the rest of the characters, not as much came from Weiss's time in the Ever After, but there are still some notable things to talk about. One of them is how the volume takes the time to address how she's handling the destruction of Atlas. While she may not have had the best life there, the kingdom was both her home and a part of her identity, so she feels like a failure for not being able to save it. But when she sees how John was allowing his past failures to weigh him down, she realized that they've all been too hard on themselves. They've grown to believe that failure means that they aren't good enough when that couldn't be farther from the truth, since they have accomplished plenty of good. Just because a hero fails doesn't mean that they were a failure or any less of a good person. This realization not only helps uplift John from his despair, but also Weiss herself. And that's another thing about Weiss this volume. It truly highlights how much she's grown into a compassionate and empathetic person. Along with uplifting John, she was the only one to realize that the reason why RWBY snapped at them the way she did is how they've all unintentionally put too much pressure on RWBY, which in turn made RWBY believe that she couldn't be open about how she truly feels. While she may have been the comic relief of this volume, she also became the heart of the volume as well. Going into volume 9, I expected either one of two things happening with Neo. Either her quest for revenge would result in her death, or she would finally accept Roman's death and begrudgingly work with Team RWBY. But even with these seemingly being the only possibilities, I had a hard time seeing either happening. While yes, Neo is a villain and her popularity shouldn't prevent her from being killed off, I was never fully convinced that Neo would die this volume. And for the latter, even if she were to accept Roman's death, I had a hard time picturing her teaming up with Team RWBY given all the trouble she's given them. It especially became harder to picture after seeing Neo mentally and physically torture RWBY. Yet the series decided to take a third path by having Neo accept Roman's death, but also having her stay in the Ever After to figure out who she wants to be. This was a clever workaround to a conundrum that seemingly only had two outcomes originally. We get the best of both, since this opens the door for Neo to possibly return in the form of an ally, since she may not be the same Neo anymore. Though even if she never does return, it allows fans to have fun speculating over what happened to her. By having Neo be in the Ever After, it allowed her to get the closure that she desperately needed, along with getting an opportunity to figure out who she is without Roman. After all, when she did manage to kill RWBY, she shut down completely since she had nothing left to motivate her anymore. Even when RWBY returned, Neo made no attempt to attack her since she realized that getting revenge doesn't satisfy you but makes you empty. Granted, one could argue that Neo didn't deserve this ending given how she's a malicious villain who only came to this conclusion after tormenting RWBY, but that's a whole can of philosophical and ethical worms I don't want to get into. But I do like the route that the volume went with Neo since it was so unexpected. Throughout the series, RWBY faced hardship after hardship, yet always managed to keep moving forward. But in the process, she would bottle in her fears and doubts due to believing that she needed to be the embodiment of a perfect hero and leader. This wasn't helped by her romanticized view of what it meant to be a huntress, putting her mother on a pedestal, and advice from Ozpin that she took a bit too much to heart.
If you are not always performing at your absolute best, then what reason do you give others to follow you?
Volume 9 serves as RWBY's breaking point for this internal struggle of hers as we see her reach her lowest moment. Things already start bad as she laments over her situation, but they become even worse when she learns of Penny's death. From here, it continues to be one thing after another as she's questioned over how Salem can even be defeated, is confronted by a younger version of herself who tells her that everyone is depending on her, and meets the blacksmith who tells her that she's carrying a large burden which RWBY insists that she can handle. All these moments make RWBY feel like a failure, which isn't helped by her not having crescent roles, since this forces her to sit on the sidelines as her teammates fight without her. Then there's a matter of RWBY's bitterness over how neither her friends nor sister seems to be noticing all the pressure that she's under. This is a spot of contention within the fandom, since people will argue whether that was truly the case or not, but I think both parties are to be blamed. While yes, RWBY hasn't always been the most open with how she feels, she can't expect others to help if she won't tell them that she needs help. And while there were moments where the rest of Team RWBY could tell that things weren't right with RWBY and tried to help, they never pushed hard enough. So by the time RWBY finally regains crescent roles, she can't help but stare angrily at it and not even be able to use it to fight the Jabberwocker due to becoming paralyzed by all of her trauma. Now some would say that her breaking point was her snapping at everyone over how it's unfair that because she's the leader, she has to lift everyone's spirits but nobody ever lifts up hers. I would argue that her breaking point occurred at Neo's Twisted Tea Party. There, RWBY is confronted by all the people she believes she has failed in some way, with her being attacked both physically and mentally, as they all reaffirm RWBY's current belief that she's a failure who hasn't managed to save anyone and that the world would be better off without her. Seeing Little killed in front of her was the straw that broke the camel's back, as being helpless to save yet another one of her friends made her accept that what was being said was true before drinking the tea and allowing herself to be swallowed by the world. But in the process, she's able to come to terms with many things, such as discovering that Summer wasn't as perfect as she made herself believe, and that she doesn't need to become anyone else since who she is enough. Now admittedly, the way they had RWBY come to this conclusion is problematic given how the show tells us that ascension isn't a bad thing, yet it's now being presented as something evil since Neo tortured RWBY into choosing ascension. And the very fact that she had to be tortured for her to realize this lesson is pretty yikes. Like, I get that character development sometimes require a character to suffer, but the show went a tad too far given how it made many people uncomfortable, along with undermining how ascension isn't a bad thing. With all that said though, the trials RWBY went through will play a major role in her character moving forward. I've seen some people say that all the suffering that RWBY went through was pointless since she's gone back to being who she was originally, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. RWBY still has a lot of healing to go through, as she'll need to learn that it's okay to be open about her feelings, but she has now begun to walk down that path to recovery. The ending of the volume even affirms RWBY's realization about how herself is enough, with how her act of kindness towards Little resulted in them returning as someone who wants to help others. And when RWBY and the others arrive in Vacuo, RWBY gets to see that her message to the world about Salem wasn't in vain, since humanity now stands united against her, with it all being thanks to one RWBY Rose. Volume 9 is easily my favorite volume due to its tight pacing, creative storytelling, and how it progressed and explored the characters. While I do think that this volume could have benefited from 1 or 2 more episodes, along with RWBY's ascension being handled better, the overall quality of this volume was still solid. Their adventure in the Ever After may not have given the characters any new information they could use to defeat Salem, but it did provide them with the time they needed to be more emotionally prepared to fight her. But how do you think Volume 9 changed and challenged the characters? And what did you think of the volume as a whole? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell so you'll be notified when I make a new video. If you want to follow me on social media, you can find links to them in the description box below. Until next time, I'm out here.